President Donald Trump just dropped a trade bombshell that's rocking North America like a hurricane, slamming the door shut on all talks with Canada over a new tax, turning our best buddy into a trade war enemy overnight. And this could absolutely wreck Canada with crazy high prices, massive job losses, and an economy taking a brutal beating. So buckle up as we dive deep into this wild drama, break down the chaos, and figure out what's next for the continent's future. Smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and give us a huge thumbs up to stay in the know. On June 27, 2025, Trump took to Truth Social, dropping a jaw-dropping announcement that he's killing all trade discussions with Canada, effective immediately, pointing the finger at their digital services tax, DST, which he called a straight-up assault on American tech giants like Amazon, Google, Meta, Uber, and Airbnb. A 3% tax on revenue from Canadian users set to hit on June 30, 2025. And, hold on to your hats, it's retroactive to 2022, sticking U.S. companies with a monster $2 billion bill due by the end of June. A move Trump blasted as Canada stealing a page from Europe's playbook, while also throwing shade at Canada's dairy tariffs, which he claims hit U.S. farmers with up to 400% duties, making Canada a real tough trade partner. This explosive move ramps up existing tensions from Trump's 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, which flipped the world's calmest border into a full-blown industrial war zone, with Canada firing back with 25% tariffs on $43 billion of U.S. goods like whiskey, sports gear, and household appliances, clogging up supply chains from Vancouver's bustling ports to Detroit's roaring factories. And now, with Trump vowing to roll out new tariff rates on Canadian goods within 7 days, Canada's staring down a brutal road. Think soaring prices for everyday stuff like groceries, gas, clothing, and electronics, stalled exports of critical goods like oil and auto parts, and struggling businesses, especially in Ontario's manufacturing heartland, where 1.8 million jobs hinge on U.S. trade, potentially slicing 1% to 2% off Canada's GDP, hammering small businesses, and squeezing families with tighter budgets as costs pile up like never before. Markets are in a total frenzy. The US dollar jumped 0.7% against the Canadian dollar. Canadian stocks tanked hard, and economists are sounding the alarm about economic chaos, given Canada's role as the US's second-largest trading partner with a $762 billion trade relationship that keeps millions of jobs alive on both sides of the border, from factory workers in Michigan to oil rig crews in Alberta and farmers in Quebec tending dairy and produce. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who's been working behind closed doors with Trump to cool down the tariff war, had pinned hopes on a July 21st deadline, set during a tense G7 summit at Alberta's picturesque Kananaskis Resort, which outlined 30 days of high-stakes talks, a July 16th progress check, and a July 30th final decision. But Trump's sudden move has tossed that plan into a shredder, leaving Canada scrambling to shield its economy from new trade barriers that could cripple key industries like automotive, where parts zip across the border daily to keep factories humming, and energy, where 70% of Canada's oil flows to U.S. refineries, threatening businesses, workers, and entire communities from Calgary's oil fields to Windsor's auto plants, and even small towns along the border. Canada's DST, greenlit by Parliament in June 2024 after years of heated debate, targets digital services revenue above $20 million annually to make sure tech giants pay their fair share. But U.S. critics, including 21 members of Congress, slammed it as a sneaky cash grab, and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce warned it could ding retirement and pension funds, while Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne held firm, saying, "Parliament voted for the DST, so we're full steam ahead," pointing out that other G7 nations like France, the UK, and Italy have similar taxes, though Canada's retroactive twist has sparked white-hot outrage across the border, fueling Trump's decision to pull the plug. The U.S. fought back last year with dispute settlement talks under the USMCA, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently convinced Republican leaders to scrap a revenge tax from Trump's tax bill. But Canada's refusal to pause the DST clearly pushed Trump over the edge, putting the USMCA set for renegotiation by 2026 on life support, as tensions boil over like a pressure cooker. Canada's earlier response to Trump's steel tariffs showed it's got serious fight, rolling out the $10 billion to large business tariff credit, dishing out up to $50 million in low-interest loans to manufacturers to move supply chains north, boosting Ontario's Sault Ste. Marie plant, and creating 1,000 new jobs to meet surging demand, while a public procurement filter pushed Canadian steel for big projects like the Green Hydrogen Corridor, a massive clean energy initiative stretching from the Atlantic coast to the prairies, which could now face delays or cost spikes if new tariffs disrupt funding or jack up material prices, threatening Canada's green energy ambitions. The melt cast origin rule, requiring materials to be melted and shaped in approved facilities, stopped U.S. producers from sneaking cheap Chinese raw materials through Mexico with a Made in the USA label, while sectoral action tables, packed with government officials, union leaders, and industry reps, keep a hawk-like eye on price swings in production, acting like a permanent supply chain SWAT team to keep Canada's industrial backbone tough as steel. Now, with trade talks completely dead, Canada's facing gut-wrenching choices. Slap on more tariffs, risking a bigger fight that could tank its economy further, or hunt for a diplomatic fix to cool things down. Though Carney's office has stayed dead quiet, leaving businesses, workers, and everyday Canadians in limbo as they brace for new U.S. tariffs that could spike costs for exporters and drive up prices for everything from cars to coffee at the local Tim Hortons, hitting consumers where it hurts. The U.S. Trade Representative is gearing up for a WTO complaint. But American industries like Michigan steel producers and the Aluminum Association are waving red flags, warning that new tariffs could wreck cross-border supply chains, with heavy hitters like Boeing and SpaceX leaning on Canadian alloys for critical aerospace projects. And U.S. consumers could get stuck with higher prices for cars, appliances, and even groceries as supply chains buckle under the mounting pressure. Globally, the EU has branded U.S. tariffs WTO illegal, with Brussels crafting a steel-weighting shield, in lockstep with Canada to protect their markets, while Japan considers sending aluminum shipments to plug Canada's supply gaps. And other allies like South Korea and Australia are watching closely, turning this into a global trade chess match where countries build walls and shuffle oversupply risks. Markets are on absolute pins and needles, with FOB Cleveland hot-rolled coil premiums soaring to record highs as traders stockpile like crazy, bracing for new tariffs, while the Federal Reserve sweats over metal-driven inflation that could hit American wallets hard, and the Bank of Canada readies to hedge rising financing costs to keep its economy from sinking. Canada's economy is in the hot seat. Economists predict a 1% to 2% GDP drop if tariffs expand, hitting Ontario's auto sector and Alberta's oil industry hardest, with 70% of Canada's oil and 80% of its auto parts tied to the U.S., while small businesses face soaring costs, forcing layoffs or price hikes that slam families' budgets. And political heat is piling on Carney to act fast without alienating voters as elections loom large on the horizon. The Canadian Business Council's Goldie Hyder warned the DST could rip apart the US-Canada partnership, a vital economic lifeline that's been a cornerstone for decades. And economists like David McDonald stress that trade wars leave no winners, especially for Canada's export-driven economy, which could see slashed investment, slower growth, and thousands of lost jobs if tensions keep climbing unchecked. The ripple effects are massive. Canadian retailers are already warning of price hikes on imported goods, from smartphones and laptops to winter coats and shoes, while farmers in British Columbia and Quebec worry about losing U.S. markets for their produce and dairy, and energy firms in Calgary are sweating over potential U.S. tariffs on oil, which could choke off billions in revenue and kill jobs in an already volatile industry, leaving entire communities reeling. On the political front, Carney's facing a firestorm from opposition parties, who argue his government's been too slow to counter Trump's aggressive moves, with some calling for emergency measures like tax breaks or subsidies to protect jobs, while others urge caution to avoid a voter backlash that could shift Canada's political landscape in unpredictable ways. Across the border, U.S. businesses are nervous too. Trade groups like the National Association of Manufacturers are lobbying the White House to rethink its strategy, warning that a full-blown trade war could disrupt supply chains for years, while consumers in states like Michigan, Ohio, and New York could see car prices jump by thousands or grocery bills climb as import costs soar through the roof. The broader implications are staggering. Canada's tech sector, already reeling from the DST, could face reduced U.S. investment, slowing innovation and growth, while cross-border tourism and retail, a multi-billion-dollar industry, might take a hit as tariffs make goods and travel pricier, and small towns along the border could see local economies suffer as trade slows to a crawl. The fallout could extend beyond economics. Canada's push for economic sovereignty might spark nationalist sentiment, reshaping its trade policies and alliances, while the U.S. risks alienating allies at a time when global cooperation is critical. As July 16 creeps closer, the world's watching with bated breath to see if this is a bluff or the start of a no-holds-barred tariff war. With steel, aluminum, and tech taxes now flashpoints for national security, diplomacy, and politics, shaking a century-old shared market to its core and pushing Canada toward a bold, uncertain era of economic independence. What's your take on this insane trade showdown? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications for more.